I'm Don K. Ferguson, Executive Director of the U.S. District Court Historical Society for the Eastern District of Tennessee, and I'm sitting in the chambers of Senior U.S. District Judge Leon Jordan, and the date is April the 7th, 2005. Judge, we want to talk a little bit about your career. You had a career in banking and in the practice of law, but your judicial career started in Johnson City, as I understand it. Tell me about that, if you would, please.
Don, I was practicing in Johnson City with the law firm of Bryant, Price, Brandt, Jordan, and Fox. General practice, very little, if any, criminal work, mostly civil, and we were busy. In 1980, the chancellor that had served for several terms died in office, and the position became available. I had two good friends that I thought would be outstanding in that position, and sought them out and tried to get them to consider the position. They both turned it down and asked me to seek it. If you remember, that was 1980. Lamar Alexander was governor. I knew Lamar. He and my wife Dottie had grown up in Maryville, attended the same church, so I was fortunate enough to get the nomination.
And you served there how long as chancellor?
Well, that was in November of 1980, and I served until the next general election, which was in 1982. Then I had to run. I ran for office, and I did have opposition, but fortunately I carried every county in the district and was elected for a full 8-year term.
And you served until when?
Till November 14, 1988, when I came to Knoxville as a federal.
How is it, how did you find it serving on the federal bench after serving on the state bench? What was your original reaction to it all?
There was a time frame when I had to become acclimated to the federal rules of procedure and the federal rules of evidence, and really get acquainted with my workload. You will recall, because you were the clerk, that as soon as I arrived on the 15th, Judge Hull assigned me over 400 civil cases. And among those cases were the FDIC cases involving the Butcher bank failures. And I received most of those cases. So I was challenged.
So you got into it rather quickly and heavily. Judge Hull, of course, was chief judge at that time and assigned those cases in his role as chief judge. Had you ever thought about a federal judgeship prior to this coming about?
Not really. I was happy as practicing law. I really didn't plan on being chancellor, but the position was available, and my friends wanted me to accept that challenge, which I did. The workload there was heavily backlogged. There were 2,200 civil cases, and many of those were difficult cases, like boundary line disputes and accountings and other contract lawsuits that the previous chancellor did not want to deal with, and so they were waiting on me. It was interesting then, I had 5 counties in the First Chancery Division. They were Washington, Carter, Unicoi, Johnson, and Sullivan. And that there were 8 courthouses that I had to sit at. So that required a lot of driving, a lot of work. But we were fortunate, by 1984, that docket was current.
All right, we know that you got the state judgeship as a result of your friendship and your wife's friendship with then Governor Alexander, who is today Senator. But how did your federal appointment come about? I know your friend Congressman Jimmy Quillen played a major role in that.
Don, you will recall there were several candidates for this position after Judge Taylor retired. Several of them chose to withdraw. I was aware of the fact, but I had shown no interest in it up until I received a call Easter of 1988. And I was asked to come. I was in Nashville at the time, and I was asked to meet Jimmy Quillen on Easter Sunday evening for dinner.
You were in Nashville
On just social.
visiting, okay.
Yes. So I came back to Johnson City and went over to Kingsport and had dinner with Jimmy Quillen. And Jimmy said he would like for me to consider the position. And that's the first I had ever thought about it. And I considered it for a couple of days, and I decided that I didn't have anything to lose. As you will recall, during that time, both of our senators were Democrats. I was a Republican. The Senate was controlled by the Democrats. And I decided that if I failed to make it through the Senate, it would be because of the Democrats.
Of course, Jimmy Quillen, big Republican, and we had a Republican president, so
Yes.
that diluted a bit the
Exactly.
power of the Democratic senators.
And fortunately, I had been a friend of Jim Sasser for a number of years. And he and I were close enough that he was supporting me initially and from the get-go. And then Senator Gore decided that he would support me. So both of those gentlemen walked with me into the Senate hearing chambers, which I appreciated very much.
If I recall correctly, wasn't there some delay on your part getting back to Jimmy Quillen because you just, and he called you, you were still undecided.
He did. As I said, we had dinner on Sunday night, and I had to do some research. I didn't know what the job paid, didn't know what the benefits were, had no concept of it at that time. And so I did a little research, and I was talking with Dottie, and I talked with two friends. As you know, my senior partner, Walter Lee Price, who you have interviewed, was one person I talked with, and the other person was Judge Walter Garland, a retired state judge that I admired. And both of them told me that you don't have anything to lose. You'll still be chancellor if you don't get it, and it'll be fun, so try for it, which I did, based on that. Jimmy called me Wednesday evening and wanted to know why I hadn't called him back to tell him I would accept it. And I told him I was happy where I was, but I was willing to go for the nomination.
Well, Judge, you've been a state judge and now a long career as a federal judge. From your perspective, from the bench, what are the necessary qualities of a good judge and of a good lawyer?
Number one, of course, they have to be learned in the law. Number two is character. Number three is willing to work. And I think if they working with those tools, they should be successful.
Describe for us your work habits as a judge on the state bench as well as here on the federal bench, and tell us what some of the unofficial rules of the game are that you follow.
Well, first of all, when I was state judge, I had no law clerks. I had a part-time secretary. I had to rely on my clerk and masters to help me schedule my cases and to get the files so I could read them before the trials. those files many times contain extensive depositions and exhibits. And so typically what I would do is obtain the files at least the day before the trial. And then I would read those files, sometimes up into the night, to prepare for the trials next day. Typically, we would schedule several trials on one day. Sometimes the trial would last 2 hours, 3 hours, sometimes 3 days. But we could foresee the number of cases we could move, and many of them would settle on the day of trial. So, number one would be preparation. Number two is start early. Typically, I have always started at 8:30 in the morning to move the motions and the pleas, those matters that can be taken care of 10, 15 minutes. I hear those at 8:30. And then we work. And typically, my schedule is to take a break around 10:30 for 15 minutes. Take 1 hour for lunch, no more. Take an afternoon break for 15 minutes. And as a chancellor, I would stay until we got through. And the federal system, as you know, we try to stop at 5 o'clock. But if we were nearing the end of a case, we will stay then.
What has been your most difficult case or the most difficult kind of case that you've had to deal with here on the federal bench?
Patent cases. I think you know that the patent lawyers are a different group of lawyers than the trial lawyers we normally see. They are engineers, scientists, background for the most part. And they talk a different nomenclature than most lawyers talk. And they are very litigious in filing motions and pleadings. We see many, many, many papers being filed. And that's been the most difficult because of the fact that I do not have a mechanical or engineering or chemical background. So it's a challenge.
I guess most any judge would say that, though, really, that the patent cases are the most difficult. Tell me about the long trial you had involving the FDIC back during those banking days, the banking trials.
FDIC versus Ernst & Winning. Of course, Ernst & Winning was the main accounting firm that were auditing the butcher banks. And when the butcher banks failed, the auditors for FDIC discovered that loans were being moved from one bank to another ahead of the bank audits by the FDIC or by the state bank examiners. And there were many, many bad loans. So FDIC had to buy those loans, suffered tremendous losses, and then sued Ernst & Winning for accounting malpractice, resulting in the losses to FDIC. We spent 99 days in trial in front of a jury. We spent many, many days before trial and during the trial away from the jury on motions and evidentiary issues. A lot of time was spent before the magistrate judges dealing with these same issues. So it was the most litigated lawsuit in the history of the district. After 99 days of trial, the attorneys approached me and advised me that they thought that they could settle the case if they could have roughly 6 weeks to negotiate. So I continued the trial and tried to catch up with my other docket, my criminal cases and my other civil cases for that period of time. And the lawyers advised me they had in fact settled the case. I then asked them to come back to Knoxville, and I called the jury back in and had the lawyers to tell the jury what they had accomplished by the fact that the jury was there and the jury was prepared to render a verdict. And what was fascinating about that was that when we took a break about 10:30, the jury, starting first with the person who I thought would be the foreman of the jury, pounded out of the jury box and grabbed me and hugged me. Then each of the jurors in turn came out of the jury box and hugged me. So we had a real warm relationship with the jurors during that 99-day experience.
And that was probably maybe the longest trial that this district has experienced that I know of. And
I'm sure
yeah.
it was. It was the longest trial in the United States that year.
It was?
Yes.
What is the downside, Judge, to waiting that long to give the case to the jury? Is that risky?
Certainly, the jury may have forgotten some of the issues, but these were excellent lawyers. These were some of the finest lawyers in the United States. And they were from New York and Washington. Of course, you know, we had local counsel Bob Campbell was with Ernst & Winning. But they were outstanding lawyers. They had total recall of the facts. Absolutely amazed me. Then there were a tremendous number of exhibits. And what was interesting, the most interesting exhibits to the jury, the lawyers made a book and gave to each juror a copy of those exhibits, which I thought was real professional on their part to share that with the juror as a keepsake. Each juror received a copy.
I don't think I knew that. Did you get a copy?
No.
Yeah. Would have been good if the court had had a copy. So there's not, I mean, while there is some risk, it's not that uncommon to delay it for a jury to receive the case.
See, closing arguments had not been made.
Oh, I see. That would have brought it back into focus.
Brought it back into focus for them.
Well, you had the longest now, and just recently you had the biggest damage award that this court has seen, I'm fairly sure. And that was just the other day. I know that case is still pending somewhat, but tell me about that case. $5 million judgment?
Yes. Young man working at Alcoa had a problem with a charge bucket, which is a bucket that drops metal into a furnace. It became dysfunctional. Unfortunately, he put his hand up to remove whatever was causing the bucket not to close. When he did, the bucket immediately closed and smashed his arm just below the elbow. And he was in control enough that he was able to find his cell phone, call for help. He manipulated the equipment. He turned off the furnace. He did a superior job for a person who is totally immobilized from the standpoint of that arm. He was able to move around with his other arm and accomplish all these functions. But he lost his arm, the elbow down. He was bright. He continued to work with Alcoa, and he made a very attractive plaintiff. The defendant was the manufacturer of the bucket, and the defendant had designed some changes in the bucket that were changed actually by Alcoa. And the defendant took a position that they did not owe anything in the lawsuit. The jury found the plaintiff to be believable, very sympathetic. The jury came back with a $5 million verdict.
That case is still...
Still pending.
Yeah.
Their motions have been filed, of course.
All right.
Motion for new trial, other matters.
Judge, switching role subjects here just for a moment. You had a leading role in bringing the federal and state bars closer together in this part of the state. Can you comment on that?
Yes, back early in my career here, our Chief Judge of the Sixth Circuit, Judge Merritt, became interested in getting the Tennessee judges and the federal judges better acquainted, more open communications and everything. He appointed me to a committee that met with the state judges, members of the Supreme Court, and some trial judges. And I was asked to draw up the charter of the Tennessee federal judges program, which I did. I drew the charter for it. And that organization is still in effect.
And what's the name of it again? It's Tennessee
It's slipped my
Trial
mind.
Lawyers.
No, it's Tennessee State Federal Judicial Conference.
There you are. Good.
Tennessee
Okay.
State Federal Judicial Conference.
That's good.
And we met last year in Nashville. The state judges were basically in charge of the meeting last year. Very well attended.
All right. Judge, you also had a key role early on in getting a new federal courthouse in Knoxville, because you were here and you were in leased quarters across the street from the courthouse in a building leased by the government, Court Square. Right. And so we were sort of disjointed here as the judiciary was expanding a bit, and we had a need for a new courthouse or a new courtroom space. Tell me a little bit about how that all started.
Well, you recall how we were at Court Square, and Judge Jarvis and the rest of the court was in the U.S. Courthouse and Post Office. And we needed more space. The court was growing. Our business was growing. We needed an additional magistrate. He wouldn't have a place to hold court. So we approached our representatives, and it was obvious that the postal authorities did not want to give up much space in the post office. So we asked Congressman Quillen, Judge Hull and I went to see Congressman Quillen. He arranged a meeting for us with GSA and post office in Washington. We went to Washington and pled our case there. And as a result of those meetings, the concept of a new courthouse for Knoxville started. And you know the rest of the story.
Right. Yeah. That's very good. Judge Jordan, you and I have discussed an incident in the courtroom while you were chancellor. I know civility in the courtroom is a big issue and has been talked about a lot in recent years. But you had a killing take place in the courtroom while you were chancellor. Can you tell us about that?
This was in Johnson City. The sad situation from the standpoint that a beautiful lady was killed in the courtroom. The background was that there were two brothers who were very successful realtors, and they were successful in buying land and developing it. One was married to this lady. The other brother was married to his wife and had several children. The lady who was killed and her husband had no children. And this divorce case had been going on for about a year from one judge to another, assigned to different judges. And it had been brewing too long. So we set it for trial.
What year was that?
It was in the middle 80s. We set it for trial. We met that morning with the attorneys. We had some issues concerning valuations of property, and we worked those issues out, and we were preparing to go in and actually try the divorce. We had just determined the property values. And I recessed. I went into the clerk's office, which was across the hall from the courthouse.
Courtroom, across the hall
Yes,
from the courtroom.
from the courtroom, I'm sorry. And while I was in the clerk's office, I heard 2 gunshots. Initially, I thought that one of the lawyers probably had been shot. But I went out of the clerk's office into the courtroom. The brother with the children was wrestling with a deputy sheriff. The sheriff was succeeding in taking the gun away from the brother who had the family. The husband was standing out in the hall, shocked. I walked into the courtroom, and the wife was sitting on the court bench, dead, with 2 bullet holes in her head.
What was the motive?
The motive was that the brother who did the killing wanted his children to inherit all the property that they had worked and accumulated. He did not want the sister-in-law that he killed to take any of it.
Which she would have,
Certainly.
Since there were no children.
Right.
Right.
I was fixing to award her some of that property.
And they probably knew that.
Absolutely.
Had read that. Yeah.
Sure.
Ultimately, I presume the man was convicted
He was.
and served some time in
Yes.
prison. Right.
Probably is still in prison.
Right. Well, on a much more pleasant note, now you had another case, again, back when you were chancellor, and you've told us about that before in general conversation. Tell us about this case. You know what I'm referring to.
Yes, up in Mountain City.
Mountain City.
Yes, Johnson County. This was a boundary line dispute. There are 2 of the most volatile types of cases are domestic relations and boundary line disputes. The trial was in the small courthouse up there. The courtroom was on the 2nd floor, of course. And then the judges, everybody walked down the same stairs, where the clerk's offices and everything were on the 1st floor, sheriff's office, trustee. Security wasn't of high order there. This was a very highly contested lawsuit. And typically, what I would do is hear it to the end. And I would review my notes, then walk right back into the courtroom and render an opinion. And the hostilities were flying in that courtroom. So I recessed. I went and read my notes. I decided how I was going to decide the case. Came back into the courtroom and rendered my opinion. I could tell that one of the parties was incensed. He had lost. And so I had already arranged for the sheriff to escort me out of the courtroom into my automobile. And about a year went by, and I'd forgotten about it. And one day I was on a break from trying cases upstairs, and there was a Coke machine on the 1st floor, and I decided to go get a Coke.
Was that at the same courthouse?
Yes. And I walked down the stairs, and get to the bottom of the stairs, and I look up, and here's this same individual that I'd held against. Don, he was at least 6'3", he looked 6'5", weighed 245. I was absolute shocked and in fear for my life. And he smiled at me. He held out his hand. He said, "Chancellor Jordan, I'm here to apologize to you." He says, I thought about our case, and I've decided that you ruled correctly. I just wanted to thank you.
Great.
What a relief.
Wonderful story. That's well, that's great, Judge. Well, those are wonderful experiences you've had, certainly memorable. Is there anything else that we should cover here? I've come to the end of my list of subjects, but we're...
Well, I think the biggest difference, as you well know, in that job as chancellor, that I was having to do everything basically by myself and without law clerks. I've been blessed by having outstanding law clerks. I started out here with Francis Lloyd and Rick Corsini. Francis, of course, was a practitioner in Johnson City and impressed me in cases in front of me. Corsini had been a law clerk to Chief Justice DeWoder for 2 years. Very bright. And today I have Mrs. Janice Kell, Elma Rogers, and Brian Eastler. They're outstanding lawyers, and they do real good work. So I'm blessed by having these people dedicated to supporting me. And as you know, we've had an excellent relationship between the two of us. You've been my friend, and I really appreciate that.
Well, you're very kind, and I appreciate it. I remember when you came on, and neither of us knew each other, and we had to find our way, and it was very good from the very start. I remember that, and I'm honored. I do thank you.
Been a good trip.
Yeah. Anything else we need to...
I just want to thank Jim for coming.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, well, Jeff...